Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and of course, this is my co-host.
My name is Chris Huddleston.
And today, we are both very excited to be talking to you about the 1986 comedy horror film, House. Now, this one is distinct from House, which we did the Japanese film.
Yeah, so I believe this is probably the first time that we've done two movies with the same name. So yeah, this is a different house.
Do you have this for us, Mr. Huddleston?
I do. This is an 1985 film. It stars William Catt, Kay Lenz, George Wendt.
5 or 86? I thought it was 86. 85?
IMDb says 85.
Oh, okay, my bad.
So, but you've got William Catt, Kay Lenz, George Wendt, Richard Mall, Mary Staven, some other people, directed by Steve Miner. And the very brief synopsis on IMDb is: a troubled writer moves into a haunted house after inheriting it from his aunt or aunt. However, I always feel pretentious to say aunt. All right, so I've seen this. Go ahead. Sorry, what?
That's about it.
Yeah, I've seen this a few times, but you were aware of this movie, but you'd never watched it before, right?
I reckon
you knew the poster.
The poster of the sort of severed zombie hand ringing a door.
Which is a great poster.
Iconic.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, that one, but I had never seen the movie. Never seen the movie. Although there were moments in the movie that made me wonder if I hadn't seen at least parts of it, because there's a kid sort of trapped behind a mirror thing that felt really familiar to me. I know that's a common nightmare thing, but I remember being a certain age and sort of being up late at night and being sort of afraid to walk in front of the mirror because I thought there'd be something on the other side of it. And I don't know if that came from this movie or if it's just a common fear. But what I didn't really have any expectations going into it, and this movie is bonkers. It's bonkers. It's really trying very hard to be funny on the one hand, like not just like gags, like there's lots of gags written into it. And I think it's trying to be funny than that there is actually scary stuff. Actually, I don't think it's very successful at being particularly funny, but it is swinging for home runs every time. There's a lot of practical monsters in this. Made me think of Poltergeist a number of times. There's a sort of a closet door that he keeps returning to, and he sets up a bunch of cameras. And
I never made the connection with Poltergeist, but yeah.
This guy behind me here comes out of the closet. And of course, I don't know if you're of our generation, you might recognize the lead actor from the television series Greatest American Hero, which is what I knew and loved him in. I used to watch that with my dad.
I would say people, our age, a little bit older, maybe slightly younger. I would say, like, for example, my sister is 6 years younger than me, so she would have been very young. But there are a lot of things that we kind of share my sister and I share a common, like a connection with, because I'm sure if I said, oh, Greatest American Hero, she'd be like, oh yeah, I remember Greatest American Hero.
Yeah.
Probably people know the song. I mean, I was at the gym the other day and they played the song.
Oh, really?
Believe it or not, I'm walking on there. Yeah, depending on what time you go to the gym, they're either playing like modern music or they're playing like 70s music. But
and nothing in between.
Nothing in between. No. The other thing I don't mean to hijack your thoughts on the movie, but this is kind of relevant for right now. The other thing probably that people would, so I'm sure there are, people that are maybe like in their 20s or early 30s or something, are just like, I've never heard of Greatest American Hero before. The other thing probably that he's known for is he was in Carrie.
Yeah.
So, but I'll get to this in my kind of my wrap up on it. But I looked through his filmography. He has like 135 credits, a lot of TV, and some kind of like direct to video type movies, but probably Greatest American Hero and Carrie are probably what he's most known for.
Yes. And he's good, he's likable on screen. I don't think that it's not that he's a bad comic actor. I feel like the comedy in this movie is very broad in a mid 80s kind of way. And it doesn't gel real well with the horror that it's going for. The horror, there's a couple of great jump scares in here. I like the creature design. That's sort of this, somebody designed a lot of animatronic, and people wearing puppet suits and a grotesque. I mean, you can tell from this, but I thought the design was all great in this mid 80s way. Let me just set it up a little bit. So this guy is a writer a la Stephen King. He's a horror writer that's famous enough that people recognize him. Hey, aren't you,
Ops recognize him. His neighbor recognizes him.
Everybody recognizes him, which I think is unusual for writers, but would have been true of Stephen King, for example, in the mid 80s. I think I knew what Stephen King looked like. If I'd have seen him in a bookstore, I'd have been like, Stephen King, And his aunt dies, and he goes to the aunt's house. Oh, he's divorced. He and his wife had a son that vanished, and there are some sort of indications that maybe he was abducted. There's a car like driving away and early on, and then he goes out back and he is sure he sees his son drowning in the pool, and he dives in the pool after him, and there's no kid in the pool, right? So nobody really believes him. This always gets me in movies when they do this, and we saw this in Anybody recently, but the cops are kind of like, hey, we'll call you, all right, settle down. Like, the guy's kid vanished.
Mm-hmm.
You think he's faking it? People are blowing him off. Like, all right, relax, man. We'll call you if we hear anything.
And if a kid went missing,
my child was abducted or went missing.
If a kid went missing, especially of a famous person,
oh yeah,
there would be there would be a massive search to find them. The cops would be investigating him for probably murdering the kid, and also his wife or his ex-wife is an actress, so she's like a TV star or something.
There'd be an investigation that affected it. Wouldn't just be like, I think at one point, now fair enough, maybe we just don't see that, maybe that's just
right,
not included in the movie. But what is included in the movie is, he calls the FBI to like follow up, like any news, and the tone of the guy on the other is like, we'll call you, just stop bothering us, kind of thing. And I'm just like, I don't think anybody in law enforcement would really be that cavalier. I know it's designed to evoke an emotional response, but we've seen a couple of movies where there's this kind of casual blasé attitude from law enforcement that I'm like, I don't think that's realistic. Anyway, there's a lot in this movie that isn't realistic. He has these sort of Nam flashbacks with his unit.
Yeah, so he's a Vietnam vet, and he's in his new book that he is writing at his aunt's house, which I believe, if I'm right, he was kind of raised by his aunt, right?
Yeah. And so when he and his wife were living there, because that's where the kid went missing.
Yeah, exactly. And he kind of grew up in this house, so it's sort of like his childhood home. But he is writing I don't know if it's kind of a sort of a change of pace book for him, but he's writing a book about his Vietnam experience, right?
And his agent is not excited about it. His agent wants him to crank out another, best-selling horror book.
And maybe that was kind of, I would have to go back to what was happening at the time, but maybe that was a little bit kind of echoing what was happening with Stephen King, where, Stephen King was the horror guy, and then he started to kind of, he's continued to write horror, but at times he wrote things that were kind of more drama-ish, and, the Shawshank, whatever I don't know if it was called the Shawshank Redemption, but, those kind of things. So I could be off on that, but
he didn't always write blood-curdling horror, for sure.
Yeah. And he had the whole separate thing, the Richard, and I don't know how much of this you remember, but he had the whole separate Richard Bachman thing where it's like
his pen name.
And Richard Bachman was like kind of a little bit meaner than what he was doing under Stephen King. And eventually, so he published a few books as Richard Bachman, and then eventually people figured out somehow, that it was because it was like very evocative of the Stephen King style, but just like a little bit darker at times.
Well,
I don't mean to derail things, but
I think he just started writing under a pen name, and then at a certain point, he dropped it. And I don't know. Maybe there was a methodology under it.
I know he definitely had. He wanted to do a little bit different type of books, and that's why he did the pen name. And people, like, there were like kind of some journalists who they found him out or something. It was like, oh, they started to put two and two together and figure out, oh, this is actually Stephen King. But
journalists,
there's journalists
always nosing around.
Anyway, I didn't mean to get us off on a tangent.
So
he's writing a Vietnam book.
Yeah, so there's a lot. And I think if you looked at this movie and you set aside the comic, what they were trying to do comic wise, he goes home, he sort of has a vision of his aunt's hanging herself. All of that's very jarring. And I think when they do this scary stuff in this movie, I think it's really effective. And I had a lot of fun with that stuff. Got some genuine shivers. He sort of hears it's not reinventing the wheel. You hear the son's voice as though from another part of the house, and little toy cars come rolling through and stuff like that. But it's noises, things rolling around, old house, creepy ghost story stuff. But it's effective. As there's a lot of fertile ground here. This is a guy who went through something traumatizing in Vietnam, as though just being in Vietnam wasn't enough. There's something specific that we realize he's starting to work out here, because he starts to kind of relive it in dreams and flashbacks. The Vietnam stuff is pretty corny. Actually.
Yeah, it's corny.
Pretty corny. But that's one part of the movie that I feel like they're not trying to be corny. They're trying to make it look like it was real and traumatic, and it undermined by how corny it looks. But there's a lot of setup here that you're like, okay, so this is a guy. I think you're supposed to wonder, like, is this house really haunted, or is this guy losing it? Like, is he never really dealt, he and his wife divorced. They never really dealt with the loss of his son. He's got this deeper seated stuff from his time in Vietnam, and the fame is applying its own sort of pressure on him, and then the death of his aunt, and he's alone, and he's starting to come unglued. And I think, at least at first, they get away with that a little bit. He sees this sort of vision of his aunt hanging herself, and he sort of shakes, and then she just vanishes. And and there's a couple of shots of him where you see him taking a pill from the cabinet, and he's just like, he doesn't want to believe that he's going insane, but he's struggling with the idea that this house could really be haunted. Ghosts, right? But as we go along, the house is very obviously haunted. This thing comes out of the closet and it leaves marks on him, right? This thing comes out, this thing behind me grabs him, and he's got these scars on his chest. And of course, Norm from Cheers is his next door neighbor. And comes over, and then this is probably approaching Act 3 of the movie, but Norm actually sees the thing.
Yeah, so I want to stop you there for just a second. So watching the movie, we have half or so of the movie where you can say, okay, is all of this in his head? Because he's the only one that sees anything. But the at one point he fires off his gun and the cops show up, and the cops are, and he's trying to hide everything so they won't see, these monsters and everything.
Killed his wife.
He killed his wife,
and is a monster that he unloads a shotgun into, and then there his regular wife is, and he shot his wife, so he stuffs her body in the cabinet, and the cops show up, and the cabinet kind of keeps coming open, and it's like it's a comedy of errors. It's like an episode of Three's Company or something, The cop's like, which way's the bathroom? And the door's open. He's like, and
they're fans, they recognize him.
And he's like shutting it with his heel. And there's a lot of that in this movie,
But nobody sees anything until Norm comes over. George Wendt, we should say, comes over, and William Katt has set up all these cameras outside of the closet because this monster comes out, and the monster comes out, and he gives George Wendt a harpoon gun, and he's like, I'm going to open the door, and I'm going to fight this thing, and you shoot it with the harpoon gun. And the monster comes out and pulls him into the Vietnam world or whatever. So George Wendt experiences all that. So at that point, you're like, okay, he's not insane. Other people can see this stuff, which is we'll talk about that more when we get to the end, but it's a weird thing because by the end, I was like, what's real and what's not?
Right. There were places in the house that sort of seemed to be these portals into other dimensional space, like the closet. Sometimes you open it and it's a closet. Sometimes you open it and it's this sort of an empty blackness, as when he gets pulled in there.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets pulled in there, and then he sort of wakes up, or is back in Vietnam, right? Reliving this. He breaks the mirror in the bathroom because his aunt painted a bunch of really upsetting, weird pictures all over the house. And
he's a really good painter, but weird paintings.
In one picture, there's his son like looking terrified, trapped behind the mirror in the bathroom. So he goes up and he shatters the mirror in the bathroom, and sure enough, on the other side of the mirror, instead of the medicine cabinet, is just this chasm, this empty black chasm where these monstrous things are flying around. And he ties a rope and lets himself down, falls in the water, and again ends up in Vietnam, but he finds his son in there. And so the house is this sort of nexus point or something.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna spoil this for those of you who don't know how we work on this show. So
this, how many years old is this? 40 plus years old movie.
So it turns out in Nam, what happened is he was walking point with one of the other guys in his unit, a big guy who was sort of, I don't know, half insane or all the way insane, and they weren't doing it right. They were way out, and he kept, come on, we got to stay close to the whatever. And the guy kind of goes nuts and gets killed by the Viet Cong, got shot by the Viet Cong, and he wants our guy to put him out of his misery.
Mm-hmm.
He said, take my knife, end it. And he can't. He's like, I can't do it. And then the Viet Cong show up and sort of drag him away and apparently torture him for weeks, and he dies. And I don't know.
But the funny thing is, when they pull him away, I don't, would this be a way that an actual human would act? I don't know. But he's like, you got to kill me. And he's like, I just can't do it. And the Vietnam pull him away, or the Viet Cong pull him away. And by the way, this guy's played by Richard Mall, who is most famous as Bull from Night Court. He did a bunch of other stuff, but and again, if you're of a certain age, you're probably like, we don't know what you're talking about, but that's what we know him as. But they're dragging him away, and he's like, Roger, I'll get you for this.
Exactly. If I have to come back,
weird, I don't know.
I'll get you.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Viet Cong just leave him there. I don't, they
don't try to capture. And it's funny because, like you said, this is really corny because it's very obvious sets.
Yeah.
For Vietnam, Yeah.
It's not quite as bad as plastic looking plants, but it's close.
Mm-hmm.
And the dialogue in Vietnam it's like canned ham, hey, cut the chatter, guys. This is serious, You want
And this is maybe
not me? Well, okay, then you take point. I ain't doing it.
and if you're listening and you're like, oh, that sounds really terrible. I mean, this is maybe like 7 or 8 minutes of the total 90-minute running time or whatever. So
yeah.
it's not like this is a big section of the film.
But I would say that there's enough of this movie that is terrible, but in a great way. Like I had a lot of fun watching this movie, but I did shake my head a number of times, be like, that's terrible. You know what I mean? Like, I just thought, yay. And the funny thing is I thought the horror stuff was really great. And I just was like, why did they feel the need to try and make this a comedy too? Like I didn't, because the comedy stuff was just, even in Nam, the guy who, I keep wanting to say Bull, but the guy who is killed is hamming it up. Like he's making the biggest possible faces that anybody could make. He's like, that hurts, gonna end it. I'm just like, oh, easy, Chief. Get your dime, we get it. Anyway, it turns out that the whole time it's this guy, it's a revenge thing. So he comes back and he's got a full body, you know, like a rotting corpse,
which is really great. I think. I mean, it doesn't look, in no way does it look real.
No,
but it's very well.
You know, nowadays it would be all CGI, but he's
like rotting skeleton and everything. Yeah. It's cool, you know.
Yeah. I thought that was great. And
as a kid, that really scared me. I thought that was really freaky as a kid, you know.
I bet. And he comes back to the house. He manages to rescue his son, but this guy follows him back, and he's sort of threatening his son. And he's like, I'll kill him if you don't kill yourself, as vengeance for what you because you didn't off me in Nam. And it doesn't really tie it all together. I mean, it's sort of, I guess the ghost world is just full of, there's some sort of goblin looking kids that pull the kid up a chimney at one point. And then his wife, there's a sort of a horrifying version of her that's monstrous. And
that's what he kills. When she shows up, because George Wendt calls the wife, and he steals Roger's like address book and calls the wife and is like, hey, I'm worried about him. Like he's having non-flashbacks or whatever. And so she shows up at the house, but then turns into this big monster, which he then kills,
right,
and cuts up and buries in the backyard.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a funny bit where George Wendt's dog, his golden retriever, digs up one of the pieces, and it's the hand, and the hand is still moving. And then the other neighbor is this hot Swedish woman or whatever who has a little boy. And, you know, I was about to say, we're meant to think that she's coming on to him. She's 100% coming on to him. And she shows up later and says, ready to play. And he's like, and she's got her son. She's great, because I'm going out here. You babysit my son, stranger whom I've never met but one time this afternoon. Please take care of my, right? I mean, it's insane. And
I don't know if she like went on a date.
The hand is clinging to the back of the kid, right?
And that was the thing where, like, is this real, or does he just imagine that or whatever? Right. I gotta say, I don't want to sound gross, but you know, I first saw this, I was like 12 or 13. Yeah. And so Tanya, the neighbor, that was like my formative years. And it's like, wow, she, you know, and even watching it now, it's like, wow, Tanya. Yeah. But she serves really no purpose in the film. I mean, I don't really know what her purpose is.
It's two very vague and general things. It's a little va-va-voom, right?
She comes up because she says he's digging in the yard, you know, he's burying the thing. And she comes up out of the swimming pool and is like, oh, I hope you don't mind. You know, your aunt would let me swim here all the time. So, you know, I've done that, you know, for years or whatever. And he's like, of course. So yeah, it's just her to get her looking sexy, you know.
And it's a red herring for the setup of the other joke, which is we've got a bunch of scary stuff planned for when he's in the house alone with a little boy. Even though his son is going to come back later, right? I mean, I know there's echoes of his lost son and all this, but they don't plumb any of that. It's just she's just an excuse to get a little boy that looks vaguely like his son there in the house for scary stuff to happen to. And at one point he tucks,
but he's very annoyed by this little kid.
I know, and he sits there right, and he looks over and the kid's gone, and they make, you know, and you're like, oh, just like when your kid was lost. And so there is some scary stuff that happens with him panicking looking for this kid. But it's one of those times when there's just, as filmed, there's a number of times in this movie I'm like, don't stay in the house. Like, leave. You don't have to write your book in this house. Yeah. Why are you here? And at a certain point near the end, he comes to believe that his son is sort of trapped somewhere in the house. And then I'm like, okay, so you're staying because you're trying to recover your son. But crazy stuff happens, including him killing a monstrous version of his wife.
Yeah.
But he stays.
Yeah.
Dude, leave. What is happening? You know,
it's not like he's this wealthy guy, so it's not like he can't afford to go and stay in a hotel or rent a house or something.
He was living somewhere else and he decided to come and live in this house. It's like, I just, time and time again, I'm like, sure, spooky noises upstairs. Okay. But that thing comes out of the closet and he manages to stuff it back in the closet. And then he's like, oh, whew, all right, I guess I'll go to bed. No, dude.
And it's not even like you said, he's taking these pills that he has in the medicine cabinet. But it's not even like he thinks, oh, I'm losing my mind. He's just, there are monsters and ghosts in this house.
And George Wendt too. George Wendt comes upstairs, thinks he's humoring him, thinks the guy's nuts. The monster does come out, drags him into this empty, bottomless pit of a closet. And when our hero finally manages to make his way back from the other side, George Wendt is still in the house. He's got a bottle like Jack Daniels, and he's gotten drunk.
He's passed out, and
stayed in the house where
he doesn't run away screaming.
I mean, I don't know what you'd do, but you wouldn't stay there. Like, what if every closet has one of these things in it? Or right? Who does that?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like, I mean, I get it. It's not, but there's a lot of like, I'm like, people don't behave like that, right? People aren't scared out of their wits and then make a little dinner. Like, it just doesn't, that's not the sequence of things.
Yeah.
Anyway, guess what? He defeats the bad guy, the bad ghost, and gets his son back, and his wife isn't actually dead. And
she's not dead.
And
so that brings me to the question of, like I was saying, what is real and what is not real in this movie? Because there are clearly things that are, it's definitely not, I don't think this is all in his head. Unless he imagined the stuff with George Wendt, because George Wendt,
unless he imagined his son disappearing.
Right. And I, it just ends with the wife pulls up in the cab and he comes out with the son and the music swells, but it's like,
believe it or not.
But it's like, then what happens is it's like, so where was the kid? It's like,
I know,
well,
the same age.
And we don't know exactly what the time frame is, but it's like he was in
hell for several years.
He was in the swimming pool. He was in the netherworld or whatever.
Well, the swimming pool, the swimming pool is sort of one of the portals. Like he falls through the blackness and into water, and when he comes up, he's in the pool. So there isn't any weird effect, but the kid was in the pool and vanished and slipped over to the other side, and that's why he wasn't there. And the abduction thing was just a red herring. But
it's like, what do you?
Was this a year ago? Was this 5 years ago? Because the kid's the same age.
But it's like, what do you tell the wife? Where was he all this time?
Yeah.
So she
shows up and is delighted to see her son as.
I mean, she's just happy that
she has
alive,
zero questions.
Right.
She's like, oh, he's back. Yay. Believe it or not. And
it almost sounds like that music. Yeah.
Well, it's no. What is it? The music choice, the one they keep coming back to is, oh man, it's like
So they play some old like Motown kind of music.
Yeah, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting and odd and not what I would imagine.
Oh, they do. There are a couple of different like Motownish kind of songs, but they play "You're No Good, You're No Good, You're No Good." Baby, you're no. And I think it's a cover of that, but yeah. So they play that, and that definitely plays into like this is supposed to be funny. It's I love doing these. I mean, I don't know if you enjoy them as much as what I do, but I love doing these. So I saw this for the first time. I was like 12 or 13, saw it on HBO, and I've seen it probably like a half a dozen times over the years. It used to be on TV a lot and everything. Because when I was a kid, I just devoured as much horror stuff as I could. And, that was kind of not your thing. So there are a lot of these, kind of fun horror films that you have not seen. And I know that it's impossible for me to separate, it'd be like if we watched The Empire Strikes Back or something like that. It's impossible to separate. I'm not saying this is on the level of The Empire Strikes Back, but it's impossible I can't look at something like this through new eyes. It's impossible to not have the nostalgia factor because I saw this when I was, very young. So I think it's always fun to see what your reaction is going to be watching this, as an adult.
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's very 80s in terms of it's just so weird. And there was so much weird stuff in the 80s.
Yeah.
And you really can't, this was a theatrical release, I'm pretty sure.
And I saw there was a sequel. They made
there are, right? I think 4 movies total.
Wow.
Now the second one has I've seen the second one more than once, and it has absolutely nothing to do with this one. It's a different house, it's different people, it's different monsters, nothing to do with this one. William Katt comes back at some point, I think, but I'm kind of hazier on the later ones. But this original one was a theatrical release. I looked up, the budget was $3 million. It made 19 million, which, is pretty good budget or pretty good return for that time. It's well made, the effects are pretty good.
I think it looks great for $3 million, even in 1985.
It looks really good. I watched this on Shudder. They have a really great print on there. I don't know, did you watch it on Prime or something like that? But it looks really, really good. It's not. Sometimes when I go back and watch these 80s horror movies, they have almost a like a TV movie feel. And I'm sure probably some of them at the time, they probably used TV crews to shoot these, like on the weekends or whatever. Yeah. But this feels, even though most of it takes place in this house, it still feels cinematic. There's a lot of tracking shots I noticed of where they show, setups of the outside of the house, and they're tracking along the white picket fence, on the front and everything. Yeah. So it's well filmed, and, you have several big comedic actors of the time in William Katt and George Wendt and Richard Mall. These were all guys who were on essentially sitcoms of the time. The only thing to me that makes it feel really kind of TV movie-esque is the score. The score, is pretty cheesy. But it's interesting to me with William Katt because I looked it up. He has 135 credits. And like we said, it was kind of, he's kind of mainly known for Carrie and The Greatest American Hero, but I kind of wonder why he wasn't a little bit bigger of a star, because he's super charismatic, I think. A really good looking guy. It's one of the things that made me laugh so much during this is, he's a good looking guy in really good shape. And there's a good section of the film where he's wearing a V-neck sweater, that has the biggest V with no shirt underneath.
Yeah, it's like a cardigan from the Wrath of Khan.
And I just thought, like, again, we were kids at the time, but it was like, was this a look? Did people wear V-neck sweaters with no shirt underneath?
Maybe crazy authors who were losing.
And it's just, it was like, what is the point even is this? I don't know. It just, that really made me laugh. But
at least your shoulders and arms are cold.
Yeah, I guess. But it's watching this movie now as an adult, when they were making the film, and like I say, you can't really imagine something like this getting into the theaters today. And I just wonder who was the audience for this, because, you know, people get mad sometimes when we talk about movies being a kid's movie, but this is, I mean, would this have appealed to adults in 1985? Because the scary stuff is not, you know, it's not gory. There's no blood in this movie. It's not scary enough that any adult would really be scared by this.
So
and
it's poltergeist without the teeth, so to speak. A lot of jump scares and stuff coming out of closets and haunted house and creepy vibes. And I think great, you know, the monster effects are really
good practical effects.
Yeah,
you know,
even if it's just people in suits. I thought the design of all of that was great. I think it was just designed to be a popcorn, you know, a Saturday night date popcorn movie. Everybody from high school up to their 30s who were still going out and just wanted to have a fun, forgettable good time, get some laughs and a couple of thrills and chills. I mean, that's
like you said, I hadn't really
trying that hard.
I hadn't really thought about it before, but Poltergeist, because Poltergeist was a massive hit. It's a massive hit at the time. So maybe they were kind of like, okay, Poltergeist is this kind of you know, family horror film. It's scary, but not too scary. You know, kind of the whole family can watch it
scary
together.
Stuff was really scary. I mean, I remember Poltergeist being like, and it took itself seriously. So maybe it'll be Poltergeist, but fun, more fun.
Yeah. One thing I will say about this, for people adults who are into horror, this is almost like kind of a gateway horror thing. So this is something that you know, if you're an adult, you like horror movies and you want to watch something with your kids, you know, not too small kids, and, you know, you're not going to be able to show them The Shining or The Exorcist or whatever.
Right.
But this is something that, like I was saying, you know, I was probably 13 when I saw this, and it was a little bit scary to me at that time. So this is something that you can watch with your kids. There's not, I don't even remember like any bad language or anything in this. You know,
ends out anyway.
Yeah, there's no real blood. So it's pretty tame, especially by today's standards. So, you know, horror fans this is something that you could watch with your maybe like 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, you know, and they're not going to be traumatized for life by this.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't watch it with my kids, but you know, you can watch it with your 10-year-old kid if you want.
Yeah, and that's I mean, I'm approaching this from, I think I saw Poltergeist at like 8 or something like that, you know. So
right.
Anyway.
Anywho. Yeah, I mean, so would I recommend it? Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was definitely all over the place and didn't care. I'm like, this just doesn't care. I'm like, it's not stitching the comedy and the horror together very well. And I'm like, oh, it just doesn't give an F. It's just the funny stuff is funny. Ha 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 ha. And now here's some scary. Boo. You know, and then the movie.
And my thing that I always come back to is cocaine. You know, was this a, because it's just so weird and
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, I will say, you know, I'm sorry, what's the main actor's name again?
William Catt.
William Catt is a good actor and does a good job acting. It's just scene to scene. This scene, you're playing a like, yoink, don't let the neighbor see the severed hand on the back of her son's shirt. Right. And he's doing that, and that's all wide eyes and like, oh, over here, you know. And then the other scene is, you know, his Vietnam buddy has been shot, and he is unable to kill him and put him out of his misery. And in that scene, as hammy as the one actor is being, he's actually there. He's gotten himself there. You know, he's really wrestling with it, and tears are rolling down his cheeks. And so you've got one guy going for the Academy Award. And I was like, that's great. And the other guy is ruining it with his mugging.
Well, and also
guys are in different scenes
with the stuff with the son, you know, so it's like the Vietnam stuff. I think they want to be very heartfelt
trauma.
Yeah, traumatic
source of the trauma.
The stuff with the kid, when he saves the kid, they want that to be very heartfelt. Again, the music swells, you know, and it's just, you know, it doesn't feel that way.
Right.
I mean, you're happy that he's gotten the kid back, you know, but
well, you can't really, you know, you can't have a movie that is 25%, you know, Oscar-winning drama, family drama. You know, I'm just pulling this out of nowhere. You can't have it be 25% Sophie's Choice and 30% Caddyshack, and, you know, whatever the other rest of it is.
The other percent is Evil Dead 2.
Yeah, exactly. You know? Exactly, where it's like, oh, these deadites, we're gonna get them, you know, shotgun 80.
Because you even have a scene where there's a big swordfish on the wall.
Yeah.
And the swordfish starts flopping around and he has to shoot. And, you know, that reminded me so much of in Evil Dead 2, the deer head that's on the wall that's moving around, you know, because it's possessed. Yeah.
So we see ghouls. There's monsters that I suppose are ghost monsters or something. There are the sort of ghoulish children that take the son. There's the ghoulish wife, that these manifestations. There's the fish that comes to life. And then there's the garden tool that just come flying off the wall and chasing him around. And you're like, okay, that's a scary thing. But in a house where inanimate objects are trying to kill you, again, you don't stay in this house. I mean, even if you say, okay, that's the evil closet, here, I'm going to stay in the house, but keep that closet door closed. Well, when sharp things start, you know, you're not going to go in the kitchen if sharp things start flying around and impale you. You know, it's like, so the house could kill him in any number of ways. It's a huge old house full of things.
At the very least, a real person would go to George Wendt's house or go to Tanya's house and say, hey, the furnace stopped working or whatever. Can I stay with you tonight? And I'll go back in the morning and see, you know what I mean? I don't know. I mean,
but just in terms of like, okay, so is the house itself is a possessed entity that uses all the parts of itself? Are we trying to get this guy to kill himself as retribution, as the ghost says at the end? Or are we just trying to kill this guy? Or is there multiple stuff going on and we don't know? And there's a part of my science fiction brain that wants answers to some of this. I'm like, what?
Well, we find out that that I don't know if we even talked about this or not, but we find out that his Vietnam friend Richard Mall has kidnapped the child. And that's what has happened. So is he orchestrating all of this? Is he running the house? We never really know any of this.
We don't find out.
And so I guess, again, kind of my big question is, who is this really meant for? Because it's not really funny enough for comedy fans. It's too weird for people that just want to see a comedy. It's not scary enough for really horror fans, you
Right.
know.
And the comedy is really it's really juvenile. They're not sophisticated jokes. So I'm thinking like high school kids, college kids. That's who I'm thinking they were thinking was going to be the target demographic for this. Just, kids are either going to get high and go to the movies, or go to the movies and, go make out in the back afterwards, or I don't know, just Saturday night popcorn movie, whoever's throwing money at tickets that time. And I feel like we adults did go to movies, but that it was mostly a younger person's game was the strong demographic. Like who goes and buys tickets multiple times to see a movie?
I'd say that's probably more true now than ever because of all the Marvel stuff and everything. But I mean, when we were kids, it was the same too. I mean,
Say that without having any numbers. I'm sure we could look up that data, but anyway.
There was tons of stuff aimed at us, and at this time. The writer of this, and he did some directing too, is Fred Decker, who the things probably that he is most known for are the Monster Squad, which I don't know if you've ever seen the Monster Squad or not, but he also wrote Night of the Creeps. Have you ever seen Night of the Creeps?
No.
That's one we should 100% do on the show. It's basically space aliens, kind of like these space slugs, invade the Earth, and it's kind of a Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where they like take people over. That's one we should definitely watch sometime. That's a fun mid-'80s one, right around the same time, like 84 or 85.
Time, because we know what we're going to do, right?
We do. Yeah.
Well, I assume that you would recommend this also.
Yeah, I definitely recommend this. Like I say, that I think for if you like kind of fun, weird horror stuff, comedy-ish horror. Again, this is something that you can watch with your like early teen kids, and it's not going to, they maybe even would think this is stupid. I don't know, but probably would not be scared by this.
Probably not, although I think there's some genuine shivers in it. I think it does achieve, the goosebumps. Particularly,
Richard Mall, when he's the zombie kind of Vietnam vet guy, is pretty cool and pretty creepy. I think it's kind of viewed by horror fans as kind of a minor classic. So, if you've never seen this one before, it's a fun movie. It's weird, but I don't know if you have this kind of, I don't know if it's a rating system or whatever, but for me, there's good weird and there's bad weird. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This I would put in the good weird category. It's not so weird.
My litmus test is, was it entertaining?
Yeah.
And I found it entertaining.
This is a movie that you could, this is kind of a popcorn movie that you could watch with a few friends, have some beers and
invest in this. It's just sit back and enjoy the ride, and be prepared for a lot of like, what the hell, moments.
And it's all, well, even though it doesn't all make sense and all that, it's not a super schlocky movie in terms of it's well crafted. It's well put together. It's shot really well. All of the acting is fine. You have some kind of cheesy music, but otherwise, and if you like practical, I mean, this is kind of pre-CGI era, so everything is practical. It's all people in suits.
And it was made for $3 million, which
$3 million
is kind of unheard of.
Yeah, it looks good for $3 million. And it's just the kind of, again, I always feel like every week it's like, get off my lawn is my thing that I'm always saying, but it's just the kind of, we don't really get these kind of movies anymore,
right?
I can't, it's a little hard to imagine something like this being made today,
unless an independent filmmaker does something. And we see a lot of really interesting independent film work at this scale budget, but not a studio picture. And this feels like a big union made studio picture on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, I don't know. I was going to look here to see what the
very often.
Keep talking. I'm going to look and see what.
So we are Chris and Chris Talk Movies at gmail.com. We're on the socials. Like, subscribe, send us some comments or suggestions.
I had one quick thing that we didn't talk about. So we watched the Japanese House from 1977, I think. And we watched this house. What do you think was weirder, and which did you prefer?
I felt like the Japanese House was weirder.
The Japanese House is just like nonsensical. It's like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I wondered how much of that was sort of culturally, like, would it have made sense if we grew up in the 70s in Japan? More of it. I also thought that it was using some of the stuff. You mentioned that was an answer to their answer to Star Wars in some ways, but it really, I think, was pioneering new ways of using special effects to to pioneer a new cinematic experience. And I think part of its popularity has to do, like, I'm thinking there's the scene when they're all huddled in the room and the other girl sticks her head and she's like a giant and it's a dollhouse in through the door. And today you look at it and you can sort of see, just like when you watch Star Wars, you can kind of see the stitching. But I thought that's really fresh. Like, I can't think of another instance in where I've seen scale played with in that way. So it doesn't all come together, but like, she's eating the melon and opens her mouth and there's an eyeball in her mouth and the eyeball looks around, and we're supposed to understand that the melon that they're eating is the first of the girls that disappeared. And I just thought that one, if I had to pick between the two movies, I'd give the medal to House.
It's definitely more of a midnight movie.
Yeah.
Though this house, the 85 house, if it were playing in a theater near me, I would go and see. I mean, I'd go and see both of them in the theater, but I would go and see this one in the theater because I think it would be fun. But this one isn't nearly as weird. And the Japanese house, I would have to guess was nowhere near a $3 million budget. I wonder if it would be, $100,000 budget.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, check them both out. They're both worth a watch, really.
Yeah.
For next time, we are going to do a movie that your
director that we talk about all the time.
Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah.
Monsieur, you have made a great movie. Your brother-in-law has not seen it, so you're going to watch it with your brother-in-law, and you and I have both seen it, and we're going to take this opportunity to see it again. It's not an old movie. It's Blade Runner 2049. And I'm going to tip my hand right now. I love that movie. I own it
too. Yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, take this opportunity. I think you can watch it on Netflix now. If I'm not mistaken, it's on Netflix. And as I would normally say with most, certainly his sci-fi movies, if Denis Villeneuve's movies, the bigger screen, you can see it on.
Oh yeah. Don't watch it on your phone.
This is so visually stunning. If you watch this and hate this, you won't disagree with me on that. I'll say
exactly.
You have to give me that it was visually stunning, and you will say, okay, it was visually stunning, but I still hate it.
Yeah,
you won't hate it. I think it's really great.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that next time. And if you don't want us to spoil it for you, then don't listen. But don't do that. Go watch it and then listen.
100%. Yes.
100%, fellers. All right.
We will share our thoughts.
We will. That is it from my end. Do you have anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, I think we covered this version of House pretty well. Maybe we can find another movie called House, so we could just do a whole podcast of movies called House.
It's not the most evocative title when you think about it.
No.
There's no modifier and there's no adjective of any kind. It's just House.
And the poster doesn't really have anything to do with the movie pretty much at all, but it is a great poster.
You get that it's a ghost spooky. You get that it's horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So great. There we go. We did it. Join us next week for Blade Runner 2049. And until then, we will talk to you next week.